Welcome everybody to the fourth episode of our Inverted PM podcast. Really excited as every week to have with us Dario, Dana, and Tom. If you want to know more about us, you can find us on LinkedIn. And as always, we represent ourselves, not the companies we work for or have worked for. Our views are our own. And really excited to continue our talks about what it's like to manage a product in security, abuse, or other places where success is when nothing happens. And today we're going to talk about a subject that is very dear to my heart, which is damage as the ultimate metric, because we see some problems with some of the metrics we track, right? We have prevention where we try to lower the number of things that happens, and then detection where we try to get more. And those are sometimes, teams are pulling them in different directions. And Dana, I want to start with you. Can you explain a bit more about the challenge, why like prevention and detection might not be the right metric, and why we want to talk about damage, why we want to add a third one?
Yeah, the reason is because you might prevent like 99% of the attacks, but the one attack or two attacks, like if you're dealing with, it depends on your volume, what gets through, but those singular attacks that get through might cause huge damage to the service, right? Like it could take down the service you're protecting. It could rack up a whole bunch of bills, like if they're doing crypto mining or something like that. And also the reverse, you could let like thousands and thousands of attacks through, or they might happen, or fraudulent accounts created, but they cause minuscule amounts of damage on your service. They're like bulk sending spam that has no never fools anyone, right? It's just a bad attack. It's only using a little resources. So damage is important to understand what is happening in your system, what the attacks are, what motivates the adversary, because you want to do what can disrupt their cost and how much damage they do. So besides figuring out what you're preventing, what you're allowing through, but detecting, you also need to understand what damage is being caused by these attacks and these adversaries.
So you're saying volume is not enough. We shouldn't look at the number of things that happen, but also sort of the intensity, so we can map this two-dimensional space and make investment decisions and make
Right.
sure we maximize our impact, right? And let's go a bit deeper into damage itself, Dario. I want to go to you. You were part of launching the advanced protection program at Google, really amazing product. And there, of course, we're trying to prevent damage. What kinds of damage do come to mind when you think about damage? What kind of actions do bad actors do?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a really wide variety of actions that these bad actors do, and to oversimplify it, I often put it on the range from doing some fake ad engagement up to disrupting the democratic process in ongoing elections. I'm not saying that fake ads are not harm or don't have a damage, but they certainly don't stand in the same league as human trafficking or exploiting trust in the democratic process. So it really depends. So we really see, and that's when you spoke about advanced protection, we looked at people who, if their account gets compromised, the harm or the damage that's being caused is closer to the disrupting trust in the democratic process than to the fake ads engagements. And there it can really be things like doxing people, putting people at risk of physical attacks because they leak their home address, or taking things out of context which can harm their reputation or put them in legal problems. And sometimes you also see with these audiences that the attackers just do lateral movements. They compromise one account to then have a higher chance of compromising another one and another one and another one to do high risk or high damage harm. So understanding that harm, what could happen, is really crucial in order to make your investments in the right place. Like I think, a fake YouTube view that puts the counter up by 1 or 5 or 10 has a lower harm than compromising an account that like scams people out of money by selling fake products on marketplace. So that's really what we look for in programs like the Advanced Protection Program, is like, who are the people where that harm is disproportionately big, and then double down on increasing the protection there.
And so that's kind of what we look at individual user, like damage, you said, financial damage, physical harm, some mental harm, maybe some blackmail or stuff happens as well, some sabotage. But Tom, I want to move it to you. Like, what about damage on a company level, on a corporation level? Is that different, or do they look at the same things? And do you also see this subjectivity, right? Like Dario just said, one fake YouTube view is maybe in some cases not equal to like someone's physical address leaking to a very strong bad actor. However, one fake video view might also lead, it's a butterfly effect. So it's very subtle. So is it different on the organizational level? And is it as subjective as what Dario was talking about before?
So my primary answer would be no, it's not as subjective on the corporate level, simply because specifically, even though damage is the underlying metric which is used, the meta metric in use, of course, is dollar value, right? So when we talk about kind of like prioritizing investment in information security program spend, it's a very simple matrix, which is kind of likelihood of occurrence and impact in dollar value of the occurrence of or the actualization of the threat. And I think we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, guys. I believe it was offline, but we were talking about one platform level vendor which has a known issue, as a lot of platforms do, with kind of the creation of fake accounts, which sometimes are involved in carrying out fraud. Now, this is not the intended function of the platform. However, to what extent does it translate to a dollar value, a dollar impact on the company? Very little, to a large extent, or it's hard to measure. And to a certain extent, you can argue it's positive, because it ultimately creates more users for more advertisers to pin their budget spend on. So in the corporate world, this is kind of the meta layer that overlays the damage metric, even though we essentially look at it in the same way, right?
Yeah, for those of you that are wondering what we're talking about, we're talking about a specific payment instrument that I put trust in, and it was used by abusers to scam. And obviously now at a point of sale in Switzerland, I try to avoid that payment instrument as much as possible. So Dana, let's go to you first, and then let's go to Dario.
I just want to make a quick point that we've been talking about damage, mostly monetary. Reputation can also get damaged and cause harm. For instance, if you have a lot of fraudulent activity going on in your system, some of your vendors might shut you off, or some of the people in your ecosystem. So you need to. It's more than just like looking at system cost or cost that they've imposed on other users, things like that. You also have to look at your service reputation.
Yeah, this is what sometimes happens when small SaaS providers get hacked. They do a lot of spam, and then the big account providers start putting them in the spam list and start blocking them, even though they're a legitimate business. But they can, and it's very hard to get off of that list. I think I've never personally experienced it, but I've heard some of these stories or read them on the internet. Dario?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on something that Tom said that, we discussed it a while ago, and I thought was very important. Where I see some companies often make a distinction between, is a harm that they want to preventing, like putting at risk their ability to conduct their business. Is it a financial harm, or is it a reputational harm? And then for both of reputational and also financial harm, does it reflect on them or of their customers? And I think especially the first one is an interesting one, because it bridges into compliance. Like sometimes, especially in highly regulated areas like finance and health and insurance and, well, also government, if certain harm happens, you risk the ability to conduct the business. And I think that is where the highest priority is often set in, at least the companies that I work with, is the biggest harm for them is losing the ability to conduct their business, because they wouldn't be allowed to serve certain customers anymore, or to serve certain services. Like if you're a financial company and you're not allowed to sell financial services, then what are you? What is left?
Yeah.
And so it's really this the type of harm for the company can be really split into these three categories. And I see that framework works quite well with a lot of companies, maybe not with everybody.
It's funny to a certain extent, and like, when you've done your ground training in information security, it's funny how you end up sometimes viewing all of the same problems through the lens of core principles. So like the way that you described that, Dario, and we've all done our homework at some stage. If I say to you CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, then this is also kind of like a damage lens that you overlay over the harm that's associated with the threat actor on your service. So what you were talking about there, right, is the ability to do business, availability, uptime of your platform. To what extent is that threatened? That's a core business value for anyone in the SaaS business, anyone in the retail business, anyone in financial services. If you're someone who's hosting a platform with a lot of PII, personal identifiable information, or heavily regulated IP, you're in pharmaceuticals, integrity and confidentiality of that data is key, right? So we sometimes I have the feeling within this industry we kind of have overlays and concepts to describe things that are already very well kind of elaborated on and just need a fresh coat of paint to a certain extent.
Yeah,
I think it gets a little harder because we talk about damage on your platform, but it's also like the fraudulent activity, like creating fraudulent accounts. It might be minimal, the damage on your platform, but the third party that they're actually the adversaries are actually going against are getting the real damage that happens to them, and you only see a small part of it, but you might be the driver for that. And like, how do you quantify what's going on with your accounts on another system? And how do you calculate that damage, right? And that's a common scenario.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. We've also talked about that offline some time ago. The responsibility that we have as people who run platforms or products to make sure that not only we don't cause harm or there's no damage done to our use, but also when people come through us, that they also don't damage them in other places. And let's say that a company establishes a damage metric, right? Let's just say that they can measure by some number the damage. And one of the things I love about the damage concept is that when you have the concept of prevention, there's a team that's trying to reduce the number of bad things that are happening. So they're trying to bring a number down. And there's a concept of detection, which is trying to find more bad things that are happening, which is pushing the same number up. So there's two teams pulling in opposite directions on the same number, and the success in the one might be seen as a failure in the other. So you have to either really separate those, which is very complex. But if you look at damage, that moves in the same direction in both cases. Let's say a bad event produces 4 damage. If I detect it when it only did 2, then I saved 2. If I prevented the whole thing from happening, then I saved all 4. So it doesn't really matter now anymore if we do prevention things or detection things. It's about reducing damage overall. It's about taking things off the playing board. Dana?
Well, but you could detect it after the damage has already been done.
Sure.
Like so prevention's really the thing that, like blocking the thing from happening and identifying what you've blocked versus what you let in. But damage, it depends on where in the attacker chain that you disrupt it. What damage happens, right?
Yeah, and that also, looking at damage also helps you to quantify the benefit of investing in detecting stuff faster, which sometimes might involve more expensive infra or more resource hungry models that can do more with fewer signals. And so again, like, it helps us to unify all our efforts to reduce damage and to address badness. It's the sort of unifying metric. And that's why when I heard about it first, I was so fascinated by it. And so let's say we have a damage metric. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dana.
I was just gonna say it's not easy to calculate. That's the only problem,
said, right?
Which I think is what you're starting to talk about.
Yeah, a picture is worth 1,000 words or $1,000, and then you might have 1,000 pictures that are worth nothing. There might be one bad view on a video that is harmless, or that one bad view might cause something else. Yeah, damage is subjective. We've established that. It's not just on our platform, it crosses outside, right? It's tied to company success, to the ability to do business. So companies want to reduce it because it's the right thing to do, but also because it basically, if they don't, they can't operate their business. So let's say that we have established this damage metric, or a company has established this metric. I want to go by each of you. What is one thing that a company could do to prevent certain damage from happening? And let's start with you, Dario. Like, what is something that a company could do to prevent damage? What are some of the common things in our inverted toolkits?
Well, I think one of them is certainly understand what the damage is and prioritize it against other metrics you have. And I think the way what this allows you to do is, for example, let's say you want to do fake product offerings on an open marketplace, and if that's your highest priority damage you want to reduce, you can empower different teams to work on that. Like, certainly there's the account compromise team, there's the account security team. If you have a fake account prevention team, you can empower them, but you can also empower non-trust and safety teams to work on that, because even if an account is compromised, if you prevent somebody who has never sold anything on eBay to sell a supercar for less than $500, then you can start to apply certain policies there. While that is maybe not done by a trust and safety team, but it's done by the team that is responsible for car sales. So I think the first step is really figuring out what is the harm you want to prevent, how do you identify it, and then empower everybody within the company to contribute to that. And it doesn't always have to be on the top of the attacker chain, or exclusively on the top of attacker chain. It probably should not be exclusively on the top of the attacker chain, but it should be across all the different.
Yeah, so let's say that we've identified the harm, Dana, and there's a team that is responsible for preventing a certain damaging action from happening. What are some of the tools that they have in their toolkit that they could deploy to reduce damage without actually hurting the real business? Because that's also around the attacker journey, they're still in there.
Right. You're basically looking at, like, how can I add costs to the attacker and not impact the valid user if it's a compromise situation or account takeover, or abuse, how you can slow down or stop the fraudulent activities that are going on with, like, synthetic accounts, things like that. So, like, some of the things are just basic, like blocking, throttling, suspending an account so that they can't actually take action. Like, there's a lot of baseline things that you can do. Some of the stuff you do, like, you might want to throttle an account but not let the adversary know that they're throttled, right? So you don't want to give it away that you put in the protections. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do to incur or to stop the bad actor. You could take the account off the system. One of the things I know we'll have a whole other topic of cost that we'll cover in another podcast. But one of the things that's important is not only understanding the attacker journey, but also the attacker ecosystem. Like, if they're buying services to launch the attack, and are they selling the accounts? Because taking actions against those can actually cause harm to the adversaries and not the good user by targeting those specific things. So you also need kind of intelligence on the adversaries to understand how to prevent them. But going back to your original question, there's basic things like blocking, suspending accounts, throttling downstream services, things like that you can do that impose or hurt. You try to hurt the adversary and cause little or no problems to the valid user, because you want to keep them on the platform.
That's an interesting one. It's not throttling, verification, hold queues, blocking. And you said not just look at your own platform, but again, like, go outside, see what you can do or what you can see from what's happening before or after to see if you can block it there. I think it was really great. And let's say that there's a plan, right? So I'm a PM in a big company, and we've established a damage metric. We've made a plan for what we could do to prevent the damage. How do I take this to the boardroom, Tom? Like, is this idea of damage something that comes up in strategy, or if not directly, like how could we make our leadership aware of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, of course it comes up, and there are a couple of different approaches that you can take, right? People love a peer example, right? People love a real life example. So one common one that we've been able to bring to the attention or of kind of seeing other people in the last few years is, if you guys remember the Maersk outage, which was based on NotPetya, let's say escalation, which essentially crippled the shipping company Maersk. They lost their entire Active Directory domain. They were doing kind of processing shipping orders on notepads and pieces of paper over landline telephones for weeks. Now the dollar value and then the impact on the subsequent insurers and reinsurers runs comfortably into the hundreds of millions. That is a number that grabs anyone's attention. Similarly, regulatory fines, to be honest, drive a lot of interest in terms of damage metric, because very direct, lots and lots of examples, and very easy to understand how that's something that comes about. And I think honestly, the regulatory thing as well, it's worth maybe a wider discussion in our context. But when we talk about like how the obligations on like platform providers are created, like to a certain extent, it's incumbent on big kind of backbone providers in the global internet to have these things as a business value. But also, we have to realize that, especially in the EU, but also elsewhere, they're increasingly heavily regulated and required to comply with extremely stringent audit, availability controls and security controls in order to prevent harm and damage on those platforms. So I think that's another important kind of motivator that we should be aware of, and I'd be happy to have a further discussion about it.
Yeah, so stories, examples, regulations, so damage is brought there. And I think, for example, this week I read this story by, I think, Hacker News or something else, that was saying that WhatsApp is now officially forbidden by the US government for a lot of their devices and on their core devices. And that's also a kind of damage that wasn't even directly done, right? It's all indirect. And it comes also back to how hard is it to capture the value of that, right? The fact that such a statement is made. Will we see millions of users now drop WhatsApp because the US government has said no for, employee phones? Or will nothing change, right? It's like very hard to calculate these things. Well, let's say that someone's maybe listening today thinking, I want to start with damage. Dario, let's say I want to go to you. Let's say you're working in a small company and you're like, okay, I listen to these people. I want to try and implement the damage metric. What are some of the steps? Can you give me like 2 or 3 steps, and then we'll go to Dana and Tom to complete it?
Yeah, I mean, I think very few companies will probably start to think about cybersecurity or damage specifically without ever having had an issue with it. I think the company that starts and is in operation and everything is sunshine and flowers is probably not going to think about it. But once you think about it, it's likely because something happens, like either because something happened that led to a financial consequence, like fine or an investment you had to make that you otherwise wouldn't have to make, or sometimes it's also just using up like cycles with your customers. If you have to explain to your customers that your CEO doesn't eat puppies for breakfast, in contrary to the spam that has been sent from your marketing department, then you can't talk to them about real things, about things.
I love
that
the
you
example,
want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And or to your customers in general, media cycles as well. So if you want to start about it, look at where did the company got harm, like financial harm or even distraction by
users, where did your
incident.
users get harmed?
Where did your business get harmed? Where did you lose a customer? Where did you get distracted? I mean, especially for small organizations where everybody wears multiple hats, distraction is one of the biggest harms you can have. So take one of those examples and turn that into a harm and start to advocate it with leadership and say, how much would we invest if we could make sure that this exact harm wouldn't happen anymore. And so you put a price tag on it.
Yeah.
Dana?
I think
Or,
if I
sorry.
can, Dario, the statement that you made there, which I completely agree with and stacks up with my experience as well, is very few companies that have never suffered anything on the cybersecurity front have very well developed cybersecurity policy and capabilities, which is a real tragedy in a lot of ways and not necessarily what you would call very good business practice. But I would ask you guys as well, why do you think that is? I mean, there's a very kind of human answer to it to a certain extent, right? But we have such a myriad of examples, you know, the idea of the CISO function and everything that goes with it is well established in serious organizations, let's say, but they always need a push.
Yeah,
Why
so
do you think that
I
is?
would say that I would add this one phrase, which is you don't notice oxygen until it's missing. And I think that's often what happens, you know, and sometimes it's up to us as industry professionals to make people aware of the oxygen so that they can make sure it doesn't go missing. So I'm not saying it's bad practice, it might just be unawareness, right? There's so many priorities on us. Dana, do you have a thought?
I think that you know, a lot of companies are, well, almost all companies are focusing on their bottom line, which is usually getting users or growing the business, and security is kind of an afterthought. They might have small resources for security, or it's hard to find people that understand what these risks are and what the countermeasures and everything is. And so it's just when you're starting, it's just not your focus. Or if you're an established business going on and you've dealt with something in the past, it's not in front of you, and so you're not really thinking about it. So that's why there's people like us that worry about it a lot and try to, you know, make people understand that there's serious problems going on, and um
I
or
want to.
help them address what happened.
And maybe to your question, Tom, I think in the end it's also to some extent a question of responsibility and accountability. So like if you're a business that depends on the integrity or availability of your business of your data to even conduct your business, like you lose your license or your ability to perform, then you have to take more precautions. But if you're a startup and trying to find product market fit, and the harm would be mainly reputational and very isolated to you, you can take more risks and not take things into consideration yet. And that's why, like regulated businesses, the cost of entry in those businesses is higher. I mean, you could be cynical and say a lot of the regulations in the financial part there are hurdles for new entries or a bit of a species protection, but there's also a reason why those hurdles are so high, because the harm is different.
I want to give a very brief narrative example for you guys, and also maybe out of interest. So I was at a Chief Information Security Officer conference this week in Zurich, and one of the topics that was being covered was kind of passwordless adoption. So my employer is a passwordless shop, which is great. And I was asking the question of the CISOs in attendance. I'm surprised in my exposure in kind of consultancy and working specifically on the identity field, how low a priority it is for large enterprises to go passwordless, given how much of the threat vector it really removes on the identity front, and, you know, taking the credentials just out of users' hands where they can't be irresponsible with them. And I asked the question, why is it not more of a priority, right? And the answer was, and maybe not an unexpected one, was, Tom, do you know how many mainframe applications we have? Like, do you know how much technical debt there is in our organization? I mean, you're talking about a Ferrari, and we're still getting into like a Ford Mondeo. So I thought, like, you know, as an investment case, like something like passwordless for a significant organization represents like a lovely intersection of both usability, business value in terms of like time to effectiveness, time to onboard, saved costs on the service desk side, you know, kind of a future orientation towards your workforce, this combination or unification of the personal and the corporate device experience, as well as a massive security benefit. But the behemoths in our large corporate landscape are really struggling to get there.
Yeah,
Hey,
maybe
uh,
passwordless can be one of our future podcast subjects, because it sounds like adopting passwordless is almost like a forced modernization of your entire IT stack.
That is
That can
exactly it.
that
I
can
think
be
exactly what it is.
like, I think I hear a lot of companies ask me how should we do it, and talking about that. Dana, you look like you want to add something.
I want to make sure that we wrap up the conversation about calculating damage, because I think it's very important, especially for new PMs and new people getting into the security space. And so there's two things I wanted to share with that. One is, and we kind of talked about it, but you to make your initial calculations of damage, you really need to understand the attacker journey, which is what we've covered in a previous podcast, and then look at all the steps and calculate, system resources, user damage, things like that. Um, but the other thing is, you can't say, like, you can't make a calculation and say this is the damage calculation and it's going to be like this forever. It's something that's always evolving, and you're always understanding,
Yeah.
getting more insight into the damage being caused in the MOs of the attackers and things like that. So it's something you should continually look at your calculations and revise and improve, because you're going to understand more and more over time about damage. So those are the two things I wanted to make sure that I called out for, like, new people that are getting into this space.
Yeah, and I think it's a great note to end. So we've talked about damage today. We talked about that it's kind of the one metric that moves the right way, and that it's important for user level, but also for company level. We talked about that it's very subjective. It changes over time, and that even if you want to reduce it, you might not be able to, because you have a lot of legacy to be there. And we also should think about what happens before our stack and after our stack. So a lot of things happening there. I want to say again, thank you, Dario, Dana, and Tom, for joining me for another fascinating talk about an inverted part of our, of our work, damage. And looking forward to seeing you all the next time. And for now, thank you for watching, listening. You can find us on LinkedIn, where we have an inverted community that you can request to join, and you can find all of us individually. And yeah, don't forget, saving one is worth it, because
All
if you
right.
save one piece of damage, you made the world a bit better. Thank you very much.